Hello,
Hello,
everybody.
everyone. Hello, and welcome to this webinar held by Global Women United for Peace Against NATO. Today, we are talking about the nuclear weapons being stored in Europe and the ones that are going to be stored in Europe. We realize that there is a huge impetus behind the United States to put these weapons all across Europe. And Europe, of course, has been, well, it has weakened itself in recent years, particularly over the proxy war in Ukraine. And we've got a terrific lineup of speakers from all across Europe today. So I really hope you'll get a lot out of this particular webinar. I'm co-hosting with Kate Kate Hudson from CND. My name is Pippa Bartolotti. I represent the Global Women United for Peace Against NATO and the United National Anti-War Coalition based here in the United States. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I see we've got a lot of people joined already, and I hope that a couple more will come in before too long so they don't miss our speakers. We start with an introduction from Anne Wright. I've known Anne for a few years. She has heroically served in the US military and even more heroically resigned on the subject of war in Iraq. And she has been a consistent anti-war campaigner ever since. She's a member of Veterans for Peace, Hood Pink, Women for Peace, the Hawaii Peace and Justice, and is on the Advisory Council of the International Peace Board. And wherever we're talking about war and peace, you'll usually find Anne right there. So Anne, I hand the floor to you right now.
Well, thank you very much, Pippa, and thank you to all of the wonderful speakers that we do have on this, and to the Global Women Against NATO and all the militarism in the world. We really appreciate the organization for what it's been doing. And I must first apologize for the United States role in all of this. I mean, it's 80 years ago in 1945 that the United States tested the first atomic weapons, and then tragically, horribly dropped them on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Our deepest apologies to the people of Japan and the people of Korea and all those who had citizens that were in those two cities. And we apologize to the citizens of the Marshall Islands, where the United States continued atomic and then nuclear testing up into the 1950s, and then also underground testing that we did in Nevada that has affected so many people. And now you all are affected all over Europe because of the United States having deployed nuclear weapons in your countries. And again, we apologize for that. And we hope that perhaps with the new president of the United States, and I mean, it is, I choke when I say this, because there are very few things that I agree with President Trump on. But on Wednesday at Davos, he said that the United States is now interested in denuclearization. And he even cited the number of nuclear weapons, which astounded me that he knew that the United States has 1,770 deployed nuclear weapons. Russia has 1,710. And the estimates are that China now has 600, but may be trying to expand that to 1,000 by the year 2030. So the fact that the president of the United States has said that nuclear weapons are very dangerous and very expensive, and he wants to talk with President Putin and President Xi about some sort of we hope would be reduction of nuclear weapons. That would be a real game changer, because we, as you all well know, the United States government over the past many years talks a good game but doesn't do much other than spending trillions of dollars to upgrade its nuclear arsenal. So I am a little bit optimistic, which I was not when I was preparing my remarks on Tuesday. But we will hope, and of course, as we as activists in the United States will be trying to put pressure on Trump and the people that he has appointed into the nuclear program of the United States, some of whom have very, very little experience in the nuclear program. In fact, the person that's going to be running the main nuclear program under the Department of Energy, he has been an officer of the Navy on a nuclear submarine. So at least he knows a little bit about it, but he's not a physicist, he's not a scientist, and that's usually the profession that we have chosen people who have been a part of this, the leadership of the U.S. nuclear program. But maybe that's good. I mean, who knows on this? But the bottom line is that we in the United States have a great push to be doing, and now we see a little bit of an opening that we have to expand for the safety and security of the whole world. As we well know, that if any country even uses one bomb, I mean, that essentially we're all done, because it just won't be one. It'll be one after another, after another, after another, until, and within minutes, the world will be obliterated. So what we are doing today with Global Women against NATO and for peace is to have an opportunity to listen to people from all over Europe and all over the world about the effect of having these nuclear weapons on their soil and what is being done to try to eliminate these and put pressure on the U.S. to bring back its nuclear weapons and disarm them. So with that, I want to thank everyone for being with us today, and we look forward to your presentations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne. That was a great introduction, and lively and pacey, just how we like it. Thank you so much. Well, my next job is to introduce Angie Zelter to you. Angie is, well, she's basically a national treasure. She has campaigned long and hard for as long as I can remember against nuclear weapons and for human rights. She's been arrested, she says, something like 200 times in the UK and around the world, and all for non-violent resistance, of course. And she's written several books. Angie is currently working on the peace camp at Lakenheath in the east of England, where the US is planning to put some nuclear weapons for the first time for a long time on British soil. So I hope Angie will tell us a little bit more about the peace camp at Lakenheath, where we can find out more how we can get there and what we can expect when we do get there. Over to you, Angie.
So Trident is the UK's nuclear weapons system. It's called an independent, minimum, credible deterrent, and it has a stockpile of around 225 nuclear warheads. In 2021, the UK reversed decades of gradual disarmament and announced a significant increase in its nuclear inventory, up to 260 warheads. Trident is made up of 4 Vanguard-class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, each of which has 16 missile tubes. Each of those carries up to 5 nuclear warheads, which are around 8 times as destructive as the bomb which flattened Hiroshima. And at least one of the UK's Trident submarines is deployed at sea at all times. The submarines are based at Faslane in Scotland and non-operational warheads at Coalport, 3 kilometres away. The submarines undergo deep maintenance at Devonport in Plymouth. Now, the UK is unique in that its nuclear programme is completely intertwined with that of the US. The UK's warhead designs are closely tied to their US counterparts, and the UK shares the Trident missiles from the US Navy pool. The UK's nuclear deterrent relies so heavily on American nuclear infrastructure that it cannot honestly be seen as independent, even though the UK can launch weapons independently. This nuclear relationship with the US is governed by the US-UK Mutual Defence Agreement, which was controversially amended in September 2024, so it no longer requires renewal every 10 years. The agreement enables the transfer of nuclear materials, research, training, and technology between the two countries, contravening the UK's legal obligation to disarm and enabling the US to exercise significant leverage over the UK's foreign and defence policy. UK and US targeting plans have been integrated for decades and throughout the Cold War included a mix of civilian and military targets. Although the UK reportedly has an independent targeting doctrine centred around the so-called Moscow criterion, which calls for destroying the capital, along with other important cities in Russia, all of which, of course, are contrary to international humanitarian law. Since 1962, the UK has made its nuclear weapons available to NATO, but operates them independently. Only the UK Prime Minister can authorise the use of its nuclear weapons, even if used as part of a NATO response. There are serious problems with the UK's nuclear infrastructure, and it is extremely costly. Each boat in the Vanguard fleet is way past its planned service life for 25 years. This has resulted in serious reliability problems and extensive delays for maintenance. Delays therefore cause increased patrol lengths for the submarines, with serious negative impacts on crew members and even more lengthy maintenance requirements needed on its return. To replace the aging Vanguard subs, the UK is building new Dreadnought-class submarines and developing a new nuclear warhead. These are meant to come into service in the early 2030s. Increasing budgets and deficient management have led to major budget overruns of billions of pounds. Another major problem is that the majority of Scottish people do not want nuclear weapons stored and deployed in their country. Should Scotland ever achieve independence, the costs and logistics involved with relocating somewhere else in the UK would be prohibitive. On top of our UK nuclear weapons, we now have changes in the status of US nuclear weapons here. US nuclear ballistic missile submarines, while not being based in the UK, have nevertheless resumed occasional visits to UK ports since 2015, when the USS Wyoming docked in Faslane in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. And although the US withdrew the last of its nuclear weapons from RAF Lakenheath prior to 2008, marking the first time since 1945 that there were no US nuclear weapons in the UK, we now know that they're coming back to the UK. US documents talk of the construction of a surety dormitory at RAF Lakenheath. The term surety refers to the safety and security of nuclear weapons. The 495th Fighter Squadron of the 48th Fighter Wing at Lakenheath became the first squadron in Europe equipped with the new nuclear-capable F-35A Lightning IIs, certified to carry the new B-6112 nuclear gravity bomb. And recent satellite images indicate that 22 of the nuclear shelters or vaults at Lakenheath are reactivated to receive these bombs. Announcements also tell us that the F-35A fighter jet maintenance and repair facilities at the base have now been completed. And now we have heard that the B-6112 bombs are fully forward deployed. So we now know definitely that Lakenheath will be central to NATO nuclear escalation. The peace movement, of course, in Britain has not been idle. CND has organised demonstrations, and the direct action campaign, the Lakenheath Alliance for Peace, has formed and is composed of 47 different peace, justice and environment organisations. We are showing resistance and public abhorrence at the nuclear escalation and the forever wars that are bringing death and destruction, environmental degradation and impoverishment to countless millions across the planet. RAF Lakenheath is in reality USAF Lakenheath, and it is the largest US airbase in Europe. It is assigned to United States Air Forces in Europe and Africa. Its Air Force units maintain combat-ready wings that are pledged to NATO, which plans, conducts, coordinates and supports air and space operations in Europe, parts of Asia and all of Africa, with the exception of Egypt. Over the past 2 decades, warplanes based at USAF Lakenheath have led devastating conventional missions in Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, Serbia, Libya, Syria, the Middle East, and East Africa. USAF Lakenheath is a threat to us all, but with nuclear weapons back under the control of President Trump, it is even more dangerous. The return of US nuclear weapons to Britain represents a major provocation at a time of escalating tensions between NATO and Russia and in the world more generally. Additionally, Lakenheath has been involved in supporting Israel, making us complicit in war crimes and genocide. After the Hamas attacks, for instance, on the 7th of October, F-15Es from Lakenheath landed in a major US base in Jordan on the 13th of October to bolster US presence in the region. Since then, it has provided ongoing support to Israel in its military attacks on Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. If you want to, please go to LAPS, this Lakenheath Alliance for Peace's website, for more detailed information about the wars and conflicts in which Lakenheath has been involved, as well as the joint exercises with NATO. It's insane to be bringing US nuclear weapons back into the UK and continuing to be a member of the Nuclear NATO Alliance when every nation in the world should be cooperating to stop runaway climate change and its consequences, which threaten all life on this planet. And that's why the Lakenheath Alliance is committed to non-violent direct action for a peaceful and non-threatening world, and it needs your support. LAP launched last year with a peace walk from Norwich to Lakenheath, where we set up a camp. Now we're getting ready for April this year with a 2-week international peace camp starting on the 14th of April. We will maintain a night and day vigil at the gates over the full 2 weeks. We're joining forces with climate, justice and biodiversity movements with different event days planned throughout the 2 weeks, focusing on particular issues. There will be an international peace conference on Thursday, the 24th, entitled Analyzing and Resisting US Nuclear Expansion, and we will end with the first ever big blockade of the base on Saturday, the 26th of April. And hopefully we'll be joined by lots of you internationals who are all experiencing the same problems that we are here in the UK. For the full programme is on the website, so please sign up and come. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Angie, and thanks for telling everyone about this incredibly important camp, conference, vigil, blockade that we're having at Lakenheath in the spring. So please, we urge you to join us. There's a lot of support that we can give you once you're there. So please do get in touch about that. And thanks also, Angie, for reminding us, well, or telling many of us of the new news that the B-6112s are now fully forward deployed. And if you want to read more about that, Newsweek today have got a big piece about that. And there's also on BBC Regional News, there's a good coverage of that as well. So we're hitting the headlines a bit with that news, but obviously we have to maximise it as much as possible. So we've got a range of speakers, as Pippa has said, but just to say there will be plenty of time for Q&A afterwards, after their speeches. So please do put your questions in the Q&A box. If you want to share information, please do also use the chat function. And if you need any language help, we have some language captions available. So you can find those in the show captions icon at the bottom of your screens. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Angelika Clausen from Germany. Angelika is a specialist in psychiatry and psychotherapy, as well as being an expert in radiation health effects and low-level radiation effects. She's active with the IPPNW, and her work focuses on peace, the ban on nuclear weapons, nuclear phase-out, as well as climate and war. So really crucial issues. So big welcome, Angelika.
Yes, thank you very much, Kate, and thank you very much also to CND and to Pippa and the Global Women United Against NATO and Ulla. You all invited me to present something from Germany. And I have a PowerPoint presentation, a small, short PowerPoint presentation. I send it to you. I don't know if it's there.
Yes, Michelle, it will put that up now. We've got that. Here it comes. Thank you.
And I want to go a little bit into the history of nuclear sharing, the European history of nuclear sharing from the perspective of a nuclear sharing country, Germany. Nuclear sharing was decided at the NATO summit in 1957. And at that time, NATO decided to deploy tactical nuclear weapons on European soil. And you see here a map where it was, where the nuclear weapons were deployed. And you see the yellow countries who are European, still European nuclear weapons deployed, US nuclear weapons are deployed. And the other parts in the Baltic countries, in Iceland, in Denmark, in Norway, and in Spain, and also in Greece, I think for some time, nuclear weapons were deployed, but then they were taken away again. And I will talk a little bit about that. But as you see here, the NATO mantra, which is true until today, is as long as there are nuclear weapons, NATO must remain a nuclear alliance. In eternity, I would add, this is the way they talk about it still now. And the next, please. We have today more than 12,500 nuclear warheads in the world. And of course, as said before, most of the nuclear warheads are possessed by the United States and by Russia, more than 90%. And you all know these figures more or less, so I don't want to go more into detail, but I would like to mention what would happen to the people and to remind you of that. If even only one nuclear weapon would detonate over Berlin. There was a study done by Greenpeace, what would happen if only one nuclear weapon of 20 kilotons, like the Hiroshima or Nagasaki bomb, would detonate. And it showed that there would be 25,000 persons immediately dead in the inner circle where the detonation takes place. And then, which is from the perspective of a doctor, which is more scaring to me, 47,000 people with heavily burn injuries would be there, and no healthcare system, no nurses, no doctors at once could rescue 47,000 people at once. It's not possible. And it means that what we said as IPPNW, we will not be able to help you, not only in the situation of a nuclear war, but also if there is one detonation over a big city. We cannot help you. So we must prevent. We must prevent nuclear war and nuclear detonations, and we must abolish them. So please go to the next slide, please. In the beginning, there was no questioning of nuclear sharing, but with the end of the Cold War and the European détente policy, you know it that the INF Treaty was started. It started in 1987 and up to 2019. And at that time, with this treaty, we have the disarmament of 73,000 nuclear weapons down to 104 European countries. So the INF Treaty, just let us remember that, was really a big thing, and we could have done more, even more. So at the NATO summit in Tallinn in 2010, Before that, there was a big campaign in Germany, also in the parliament, and the parliament voted that we want a withdrawal of the US nuclear weapons. And our then foreign ministry, we see him at the left, Guido Westerwelle. He, at this NATO summit, he reiterates his call for the withdrawal of tactical nuclear weapons from Germany and also from Europe. It was not only for Germany, but also for Europe and the European countries. And he was supported by the other European countries, Netherlands, Belgium, and Italy. And at that time, the NATO General Secretary Rasmussen said, "Oh, the presence of American nuclear weapons in Europe is an essential part of a credible nuclear deterrent." And then we have Hillary Clinton there, and I cannot see her quote also. Let me just look. The reduction of US nuclear weapons, she said, can only be done with a treaty between the United States and Russia. So she says there must be a treaty. But we never saw that treaty, even though, as Obama in 2009, 1 year before, said in his speech in Prague that the United States and Russia could easily do more disarmament of nuclear weapons. Would be no problem if each one had only 1,000 nuclear weapons. So to the next, please, the next slide, please. So we see the erosion.
1 minute, Angelika.
Okay. Oh. Then I skipped the erosion. You have to look it up later. And what we can, the drivers of the erosion of arms control is great power rivalry and the war on Ukraine. And what we really need is a paradigm change from military-based security policy to civil security policy. Win peace, not war. We believe in the UN Charter, denuclearize and demilitarize the TPNW. And we also have to add military carbon dioxide into the country reports of the UNFCCC, talking about climate. And the next one, please. There are nice photos I would like to share with you. We do, go one more, please. One more slide. Yes, this is at Büchel, where the nuclear weapons are deployed in Germany, usually. And we have some nice pictures. So what do we do there? We have blockades. And we have blockades that the blockaders try to get into the place of the where the nuclear weapons are in Büchel. And they try to start popular lawsuits, and we have 20 of them now, and we have also 20 campaigns that we want to change in the legislation that Germany decides to skip and to end the nuclear sharing thing. So you see here on the right side, nuclear-free Germany and Europe. And also there's one on the nur wer Massenmorden will, besitzt Atomwaffen. This means only the country that wants to do mass murders, they possess nuclear weapons. And I think this is really true now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Angelika. That was really informative. Sorry to hurry you up there, but we must stick to the schedule. Otherwise, we'll be running very late. And I'll just to follow on from what you said, there is a remarkable book written by Annie Jacobson. It's called Nuclear War. It's a minute-by-minute account of what would happen in a nuclear exchange. And I would say if you're undecided, get that book. I got the audio version myself because I didn't think I'd have the strength to read it. So there you go. Next up, we have from Italy, Patrizia Sterpetti. Patrizia is a cultural anthropologist researcher. She's active in WILPF since 1992, deals primarily with human rights and disarmament. So without more ado, Patrizia, if you're ready, please take the floor.
Thank you for invitation. I start military base and installation date back to 1951. There are apparently in Italy 120 US or NATO bases, Aviano air bases in Friuli Venezia Giulia e Gedi in Lombardy host nuclear weapon. The bomb arrived in Gedi in 1963. Italian pilot trained to be ready to use nuclear bomb as required by the secret pact between Italy and the US, both countries having ratified the No Proliferation Treaty, Italy on 25 April 1975, which imposed not to receive nuclear weapon or direct or indirect control of them from anyone. The risk to which the population is exposed is obvious, both for accident caused by, for example, by lightning that strike the depot, and because we are nuclear target. A Greenpeace study calculated that a nuclear explosion in Gedi could cause from 2 to 10 million deaths. There have been many pressure initiatives by pacifists against parliament and government since 2017. And after in 2021, the year when the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons came into force, signatures were collected, cities were involved in ICAN city appeal, but the Italian government policy considered the No Proliferation Treaty the cornerstone for disarmament, no proliferation and peaceful use of nuclear energy. For this reason, a group of 22 associations decided to entrust IALANA, International Association of Lawyers Against Nuclear, with a legal study on the legitimacy of nuclear weapons in Italy in 2021. The study was concluded in March 2022 and became a book, Legal Opinion on the Presence of Nuclear Weapons in Italy, published by Multimage, close to presence. The book is now about to be published in English, C-Mage. We are choosing the cover photo, and will be available on the occasion of the third meeting of the State Party in New York in March. After the publication in Italian of the book, it was decided to implement a criminal action foreseen in the law study. On October 2, 2023, 22 peace activists filed a complaint with the Public Prosecutor Office in the Court of Rome against the Italian government as responsible for the import and possession of nuclear weapons in Italy. The complaint was presented by one of the lawyers appointed, Claudio Giangiacomo and Joachim Lau, both from IALANA Italia. In particular, the complaint examined the import and possession in Italy of the nuclear weapon B61-3, B61-4 and B61-12 in light of the Italy ratification of No Proliferation Treaty. Okay. And in the base of Syria national law,
You've muted yourself, Patrizia.
Sorry. Law 185 in the 1990 on the prohibition of moving armament in contrast with the Italian Constitution, which repudiate war for the resolution of international dispute. Law 895 of 1967, for which it is a crime to introduce in a state and transfer weapon of war and explosive, and the Royal Decree 773 of 1931, named TULP, would prohibit the manufacture of and possession of weapons of war without a license from the Minister of the Interior. Paradoxically, even if there were an authorization from an Italian authority, this could not legitimately authorize the circulation of nuclear weapons. Article 47 of the Prevention of Accident and Disaster included nuclear weapons. Possession is a permanent crime and is an exercise of a power. The Italian government is responsible for the import and possession of nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, the complainants discovered some months later that their complaint has been archived after only 9 days without any notification, despite having been regularly requested, and as the qualification of injured party is denied. The complainants decided to file appeal in 5, but with the financial support of all 70 others, relying on the criminal lawyer Latessa. This lawyer is referring to a direction of the European Court of Human Rights that aim to broaden the concept of injured party. We have 50 days to lodge appeal and discover the reason for the achieving. We assume that the justification is for a non-questionable political act, but if in politics a certain autonomous operation is foreseen, this must still operate within the scope of the law. There can be political discretion, but the importation of nuclear weapons is against the law. While on the one hand our complaint was achieved, on the other hand the Lombardy region, where the Gedi Air Base is located, published in its website on October 30, 2025, for a resolution to establish a 30 micro depot in the distribution of potassium iodide under the title Ukraine Emerging Possible Nuclear Risk. On January 21, the decree for the sending weapons to Ukraine until December 2025 was voted and approved by the Senate. The complaint for omission of official act presented in Pordenone against the prefecto of that province was also dismissed as the magistrate did not consider the prefect to be required to respond to the request for the preparation of anti-nuclear evacuation plans.
1 minute, Patrizia.
The group of complainants agree on the need to operate on multiple levels, educational, informative, political, and legal, to achieve the objective of the Italian ratification of the Treaty of Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the stigmatization and elimination of nuclear power in Italy. I finish. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Very good timing there. So now it's a pleasure to welcome your other colleague from Italy, Marta Durin. Marta is a nuclear expert and she's coordinator of the Young WILPF network. So welcome, Marta, over to you.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks also for this opportunity. It's really important to have this conversation due to the international situation. So I will explain a little bit more about the Italian situation. 3 years ago, during my master thesis, I analyzed a lot the nuclear situation of Italy. And as Patrizia was saying, in Italy, we have 40 nuclear warheads between the bases of Fabiano and Gedi. And this is the estimated higher number of US tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. So this is a really important starting point. During my studies, I arrived to the conclusion that the nuclear sharing system is really expensive, obsolete, and useless from a strategically and a military point of view. I interviewed few representative of the Italian army, and they confirm that the system is not useful in case of nuclear war. So this brings me to the conclusion that the nuclear sharing system is just a symbol of the Atlantic connection, but this would be able to function in case of activation. And this is really important when we're talking about advocacy, when we're talking about bringing the nuclear issue at public opinion level, because we have to underline that this system is not able to function. And so, sorry. And so this is really, really important to underline. In addition, the dislocation of tactical nuclear weapons on the Italian territory is against the Italian constitution, the international humanitarian law, the peace agreements signed by Italy after the Second World War, and even against the principle of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So this system is totally illegal from any point of view. Italy ratified the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation Treaty, in 1975, so 5 years after its entry into force. And this is what related to the Italian willingness to co-create an European nuclear force. Italy wanted to have this nuclear force in Europe, and it was really important to create the European cohesion. But after, inside the NATO context, US decided to display these nuclear weapons in the territory, and so Italy decided to ratify the NPT and to join the US nuclear umbrella. Today, we are following the new news about the modernization of these arsenals in Europe. So yesterday, US announced that the bombs Big 61 were replaced with the bomb Big 61-12, which are more dangerous than the previous one. And I can affirm that in the last years, Italy has been a passive actor in the field of nuclear disarmament and has not taken part in the TPNW negotiation and neither in the meeting of the state parties, neither has observatory states. And in this field, Italy is totally following the line of NATO, or rather speaking, the line of the USA. When in 2021, I interviewed the former Italian Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio about the Italian nuclear choices, I was told that the government follows the line of the NATO and that they saw in the Treaty of Non-Proliferation the only way to achieve the total nuclear disarmament, which is a really questionable choice from my point of view. And in conclusion, since the 60s, Italy participation in the nuclear sharing system has never been questioned by any governments, regardless of their orientation. And today, Italy is not following the enormous progress on humanitarian disarmament. And while the world is moving forward on nuclear disarmament, Italy is stick to its policy related to US and related to NATO. And even if the civil society is really active in Italy, as Patrizia was saying, the topic is not subject of discussion at the public opinion level. And this is the first problem that we have to face in this moment. We have to bring this discussion to a higher level. We have to be able to question the existence of this system and the choices that this government and the previous one have made in this field. And finally, in the last year, the government of Giorgia Meloni announced the return to the nuclear energy in Italy. The nuclear energy was abolished in Italy in 1987 after a popular referendum. So today we are assisting to a change of political guide, which is a really doubting situation for the moment.
Thank you very much, Marta. That was really good, and it was very good to have so much information from Italy, about which we haven't heard much up until now. So we hope that continues. And one thing that I really have to bring up is, of course, there is still no solution for the waste product from nuclear reactors and nuclear installations. And in Britain, they just said yesterday, oh, they're going to come up with this great system and start burying it somewhere. So that, you know, if we don't manage to kill ourselves in the next little while, We'll probably manage to kill the survivors from our malpractice with the nuclear waste product. Anyway, our next speaker is Naomi Zelter from Belgium. Naomi, I can see you there. Yes, good. Naomi is the security and disarmament expert at Pax Christi in Flanders, where she deals with the topics of nuclear weapons, autonomous weapons systems, and international security. Welcome, Naomi. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Pippa, for the introduction, and thank you, Ulla, for the invitation. Good evening or morning or wherever you are to everybody. So Belgium's history with nuclear weapons is quite particular. Its history predates that of most European countries and even the existence of NATO and the nuclear sharing agreement. And I would like to start with that before I get a bit deep on how Belgium involves itself with the nuclear sharing. But its long history with nuclear weapons also exemplifies how ugly and cruel the existence of them are. So I think most of you have seen the movie Oppenheimer, where they very lightly touch on the uranium mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which back then was still a Belgian colony called the Belgian Congo. In 1939, the President Roosevelt became aware of the potential of uranium when it comes to energy, but most importantly, creating powerful bombs. He was made aware of this by Albert Einstein, who wrote him a letter in which he explicitly says that the most important source of uranium could be found in Congo. The three other places where we could also find uranium, the US and Canada, just simply did not possess as fine of a mineral, because 100 kilograms of raw Congolese uranium could yield 1 kilogram of refined uranium for nuclear bombs. In those other areas, it could only produce 2 to 3 grams of that same refined uranium. So when they found this out, the mining happened in the Chicolombre region, which is east of DRC, where there is still a lot of tension and a lot of war going on because of its richness in resources. But this mining happened under the watchful eye of Belgian colonial officers, and all of this was carried out in strict secrecy so that enemy forces would not find out what the Allies were planning in this war. And therefore, Chicolombe was hardly mentioned in any documents, and all the governments involved made sure that even the people who were there were not fully aware of what was going on. They decided to keep up the appearance that most of the minerals used for these weapons came from Canada. So this level of secrecy and then the disinformation campaign that followed this was meant to keep the enemies in the dark, but it also allowed for the horrific working conditions and everything that followed after because as a result of this to fly under the radar. While it was never a secret that Belgium was responsible for a particular cruel colonial regime, the need to keep this secret is still hampering investigations of the environmental and health impacts in the region to this day. Even after the Second World War and after the Congo gained independence from Belgium, they still saw it as their duty to make sure that the region was under control of a leader that will make sure that he served their best interest. And that's why they even had a hand in assassinating the first democratically elected president in the region because he didn't align with the Belgian government's needs. And to this day, we still see a lot of political instability in the region because of this need for control. The way Belgium acquired nuclear weapons at the beginning of the 60s has always been a very sore spot in Belgium because there was a lack of transparency and the people were not aware of what was effectively going on. There was very little public awareness, but the Soviet threat seemed to be the biggest problem for the government, even more so than their duty to the civilians for transparency and honesty. However, once the public became more aware of what was going on in the 80s, that is when we saw the biggest marches for peace take place in Belgium. Up to 200,000 people would take to the street to demand the removal of these weapons. However, to this day, the Belgian government still says that they do not confirm nor deny their presence on our territory, so they still deny transparency to their own citizens. Nuclear weapons on our territory put a big target on Belgium's back, even when it comes to conflicts where they are not necessarily involved, and people deserve to know the implications of this. However, the story of the nuclear umbrella and NATO and Article 5 has gained a lot of success in the past few decades, that a lot of people now truly believe that they are here for our safety, and should something happen, that they will be deployed for our safety. Even though we know that with the way the nuclear planning group works, and that the final decision does come to the US president, the UK prime minister, that isn't necessarily the case. However, Belgium could play a key role, I believe, in disarmament, the same way that they have decided to do in 1995, when they became the first country to sign the Convention Against Anti-Personnel Mines, and also became the first country in 2006 to ban cluster munitions. Belgium's entire history with nuclear weapons goes hand in hand with injustice and the violation of human rights. Every decision that has ever been made for the development, proliferation, and survival of these weapons has been at the expense of others, whether this is the people in Congo that were enslaved for these minerals, or the children that were born afterwards with health conditions that can't get justice because the files on this are not being declassified and there's so much secrecy around it, or even their own citizens who are denied transparency and honesty when it comes to the decision to put these weapons here. I believe that Belgium owes it to make steps towards disarmament and to finally start engaging with the relevant treaties for this, such as the TPNW, and to start talking to civil society with how they can start making Belgium safer as they are claiming. Because right now the narrative in Belgium is very much that we cannot rely on the United States forever or on the NATO alliance to protect us, and that therefore we should increase our defense and military budgets. But I see it as them trying to get their cake and eat it too, because they are still talking about holding on to these nuclear weapons on our territory. And with that, they also accepted to take B-35 planes to carry those nuclear weapons, despite knowing that in the case, the horrific case that they should ever be used, the Belgian pilots that would be carrying those weapons would be heading for a suicide mission, because these planes cannot go all the way to Russia and return back. If someone would have to carry these weapons, it would be a suicide mission, and they know that. But yet they claim that this is here for our safety, and then that's why they continue to deny us any conversations about disarmament. If the government truly is trying to keep the citizens safe as they claim, they should stop relying on weapons of mass destruction that will not only affect us, but the entire world as we know it. And once that is done, that is when they can start talking about a safer Belgium. Besides that, I also believe that Belgium needs to start taking responsibility in the horrific role that not only hosting, but also helping create these nuclear weapons have played, not only in the colonies, but for the entire world, in Japan and in the communities where nuclear weapons have been tested, because they also play a role in this. And by partaking in nuclear sharing, they keep perpetuating this cruelty that they have inflicted upon the world with their participation in this. And that's why I believe that that these types of conversations are important, especially when it comes to nuclear weapons in Europe, because I don't think that they always understand just how far the pain and cruelty goes when it comes to just wanting to house these weapons. There are always communities that have to suffer for this, because I believe nuclear weapons go hand in hand with violations of human rights. I hope we can continue these conversations, and this is where I end.
Thanks very much indeed, Naomi. That was brilliant as ever. So our next speaker is coming from the Netherlands. It's a great pleasure to welcome Guido van Leemput. Guido has been political advisor on foreign affairs and defence policies for the Socialist Party in the Dutch Parliament. Currently, he's one of the co-founders of the New Peace movement in the Netherlands, and he speaks every month on the square in Amsterdam, talking about developments in the war in Ukraine. He's also involved in organising the peace actions like the counter summit that are going to take place during NATO's summit, which is taking place in The Hague in the Netherlands in June 2025. And of course, we hope that everyone will join Guido and others there for that counter summit and other events. So Guido, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Kate. I will cover some current issues of Dutch nuclear policies. And there is no longer a political pressure from a movement as there was a long time ago. For example, the subject of nuclear weapons in the Netherlands has been discussed occasionally in Dutch Parliament in recent years, mainly as a result of questions raised by the Socialist Party and on occasional hearings also initiated by the SP. Everything stated here is based on written information obtained from the government as a result of parliamentary questions. That brings me to several subtopics. So the first one is the history of nuclear weapons in the Netherlands. And some others have already told about the introduction of nuclear weapons in their countries in the 60s and the late 50s. And until the 1990s, the Netherlands had 6 different nuclear weapons at least 4 nuclear weapons sites. And after the Cold War, 5 of those nuclear weapons have been abolished, but 1 remained. That was the atomic bomb for the Air Force's F-16. And the political highlight was the parliamentary majority that got a motion from the SP. In late 2013, Parliament decided that the F-16 replacement should not have a nuclear task. This was a stretch because from the beginning of the Dutch development in building the F-35 in 2002 already, it was clear that this F-35 would have a nuclear task. And the majority for this motion crumbled after the Russian invasion of Crimea in March 2024. So it brings me to the arrival of the F-35. The F-35 is set to enter service with the Dutch Air Force in 2019, and the F-35 will have a new nuclear bomb, the B-6112. It was known from international literature, and as some others have already announced, this week it was known that it's all implemented. That nuclear bomb is considered a modernization because it can be used against a smaller target than before. This is another reason why transparency of this modernization has to be called for. 4, transparency. And in another motion calling for information on the modernization of nuclear weapons in the Netherlands, it was passed in 2020. The government argues that the B-6112 does not represent a modernization of the nuclear arsenal, but a modification of the B-61 type under the Life Extension Program LEP. Indeed, according to the government, the United States stressed as early as 2010 in the Nuclear Posture Review that the Life Extension Program is aimed at adapting US nuclear weapons and does not create new military capabilities. And therefore, according to the Dutch government, there's no need to say more than there is currently in this case, and they don't have to be more transparent than they weren't before. In its response to the motion, the government stated that the Netherlands, I quote, continues to strive to be as transparent as possible within the framework of the alliance agreements. 5. NATO Nuclear Weapons Alliance. As long as nuclear weapons exist in the world, NATO will remain a nuclear alliance, and nuclear deterrence will continue to play an essential role in maintaining strategic balance and preventing the deployment of nuclear weapons. Official language. The Netherlands is and remains fully committed to NATO for this nuclear deterrence and fulfills it with a nuclear weapons task. More official language. The fundamental purpose of allied nuclear deterrence is to preserve peace, prevent coercion, and deter aggression. More official language from the Dutch government, and they are opposed against participating in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And then it was said before by several other people, nuclear sharing. And the Dutch government has accepted that the Dutch Air Force can or should use nuclear weapons. Dutch pilots are trained for this purpose. The Belgian practice was very clear. This practice is called nuclear sharing. This makes the Netherlands a subcontractor in the management and possible use of nuclear weapons. The legal base for this was settled when the Non-Proliferation Treaty was created in the late 60s, and the government's formula in that is, I quote, none of the treaty parties formally objected to the agreements when the treaty was signed in 1968, entered into force in 1970, or in the decades that followed. The agreements do so not violate the NPT. End quotation. Then there is the exercising of nuclear weapons, especially the exercise Steadfast Noon. In 2020, NATO announced for the first time an annual nuclear dimensions exercise. In the process, the name of the exercise Steadfast Noon was announced or admitted. Aircraft from countries across the alliance were also participated in this exercise. It is up to allies themselves to announce whether they are participating in this exercise, says, official language, the government. Like last year, the Netherlands participated with a unit at Volkel Air Base, all according to the government. And then there is the issue of the accidents. However, the nuclear bombs do increase the risk of nuclear accidents. In 2022, there was a report that a nuclear weapon accident had happened at Volkel Air Force Base. A picture had surfaced of a bandit B-6111 nuclear bomb with a kind of patches over the nose. The Federations of American Scientists determined that the photo was taken at Volkel. The Dutch government denied everything and had asked the Americans what had happened. The Americans reported that it was an exercise and nothing was said about Volkel. Nothing wrong. Ninth issue, artificial intelligence and nuclear weapons. Although questions were asked about this, no concrete answers were given. And hacking? The same applies to the risk of hacking of nuclear infrastructure. Formal response, the protection of military infrastructure against cyber attacks has the highest priority. This obviously also applies to infrastructure that is important for the execution of the Dutch nuclear weapons task. So my conclusion, Kate, is we need a pan-European peace strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Guido. That was fascinating. Right, we're doing wonderfully for time. Thank you so much to all our speakers. Our next speaker is Ben Kramer. I think we can have Ben on screen shortly. Ben is living in France, in Paris. He was co-moderator of the European Parliament's first debate in 2008 on collective security and the environment. He teaches geopolitics and sustainable development at the Faculty of Social and Economic Sciences at the Catholic Institute in Paris. He's an expert on environmental security. Thank you, Ben, for joining us. Please crack on.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Ulla, for having invited me. And actually, I was scared not to be able to join, because I thought, well, the French have got always a kind of specific position on those issues. And well, it's kind of complicated because the French have a kind of exceptional stance and an exceptional position. So I will try to summarize that in order to make it clear to everybody. After all, if we talk about disarmament and also security and environmental issues, France was one of the few countries who never signed nor ratified the ENMOD Convention of 1978. And on top of that, France never signed nor ratified the Seabed Convention, which was actually one of the first attempts to have a denuclearization of all the oceans. And now, of course, this gives you just a little bit of the framework. Plus, I have to add the Non-Proliferation Treaty. France decided to boycott it until 1992. And in the meantime, concerning proliferation, nuclear proliferation, France was at the top of that little game, trying to help and contributing to the nuclear program of South Africa, the nuclear program of Israel, very sophisticated at the time, and Pakistan and some others. So France has got a very special record in the field of armament and nuclear armament. So I have to put that to you as a kind of I could apologize, but in a way, what is interesting is this contradiction of the French, which is very French. And I'm half Dutch and I'm half Swiss, and I've been living in France for the last 30 years. And when I worked at Greenpeace, I always had to explain how the French policy, nuclear policy, was working. Because if you look at the history of the French bomb and the French force de frappe, as the French are very proud of it, one of the intellectual inspirator of the French bomb was General Gallois. And Gallois told me over the years to what extent he was influenced by NATO. And NATO, the shape, mainly shape, and some of the generals of shape told him that France should hurry up and have the bomb. So this whole myth of France independence is very ambiguous to all the experts who know a little bit about the situation, because France at the same time wanted to proud itself of being so independent and having nothing to do with the rest of this Atlantist world, but at the same time was very influenced by NATO strategy. And the US was very thankful to France getting the bomb, because that could also make it more complicated for the enemy. And to prove that a little bit further, I would like to add something that historically has been a little bit sidelined, which is the fact that when France started in the 50s, that was before de Gaulle, actually. So this was the Fourth Republic. Sorry to go in those details, but France actually tried to have an agreement, and with Germany and with Italy, in order to have a kind of multilateral force, nuclear force. And there was a big deal, especially with the Germans, in order to have Germany help France, especially in the economic field and with the enrichment of uranium. So this is something that has been totally forgotten by a lot of the politicians. But this was part of the contradiction of the French birth of its nuclear arsenal. And probably this deal never happened. But today, when we go back, we find out that actually this whole gymnastic of Europeanization of the French bomb is something that is coming back these days in a very interesting way. France is now saying, well, actually, our bomb has always been in the name of Europe. France has always tried to emphasize its and legitimize actually its force de frappe, its bomb, by saying, well, actually, it is also at the service of most of the Europeans. Unfortunately, those silly Europeans are not really interested, are not even grateful. Same they're saying about Africa, by the way. Not grateful enough, and don't realize to what extent our bomb can also be a kind of supplement to the US umbrella, but can even be more than that, which is Macron's big ambition, is to say, well, after all, our force de frappe being sufficiently, it's not a minimal deterrence, it's a little bit more than that, as a middle power, we are ready to put our bomb and our scientific knowledge at the disposal of all those neighbors who would, of course, appreciate this gift, which is not at all considered as a gift by all the others. Please, let's have it in a straight way. But it's interesting to see that you have always had in the French this kind of those contradictions. For example, France has promoted itself by being, in a way, anti-NATO, because in the 60s, there was a big decision of removing all the US bases. and there were a lot of them in this country. Also naval bases, there were a lot of them.
1 minute, please, Ben. 1 minute.
Yes. Am I talking too fast?
No, you've just only got 1 minute left of your time.
Oh, okay. Well, then I will continue with this ambiguity of having been at a certain moment removing itself of the military command, then coming back, and then trying to say that we are actually one of the best allies of the whole European setup. There is no question these days. So as I have only 1 minute left, let me just give the picture of today. There is no question of leaving NATO, and among the politicians, and even at the left of the spectrum, there is not much discussion about how can we do without NATO. Then this is not part of the program of most of the political parties. The only thing that has to be done, and especially among the peace organizations, is to say, hey, can we try to promote something that would be Europe as a superpower of peace, number one. Number two, can we try to understand that to make something peace that has to do with peace, we have to have a real strategy and have enough money and enough people who are ready to think about a real strategy. And number three, can we have something that is called non-alignment? Non-alignment would mean also a new relationship with the BRICS and with the rest of the third world. I'll stop there because I don't want to take more of your time, but this is where the French thinkers have not gone much further yet, not even promoting what Europe was supposed to do a couple of days ago in 2002, which was also to implement a doctrine of human security. That has also been, unfortunately, totally abandoned. Thank you so much for sharing all this with you.
Thanks very much, Ben, and thanks for sharing that too. Sorry about the time limit, but we're shortly going to be moving on to Q&A, so there'll be more opportunity for contribution. First of all, though, I would like to turn to our final speaker. It's a real pleasure to welcome Ulla Klotzer from Finland, and Ulla will be known to everyone who's involved in Global Women United for Peace and Against NATO. So it's great to have you here. Of course, you're a long-time activist in many crucial arenas. You're a former vice chair of the Finnish Green Party and a former chairperson of the EU Critical Movement in Finland. So welcome, Ulla.
Thank you, Kate. I'm going to be very short because Finland has not got any nuclear weapons yet, but we don't know what is going to happen. Could I have the first slide, Michelle? Yes. Could you make it big so that the side, yeah, right, thank you. Dear friends, on top of what has been said by the previous speakers, a new threat has arisen in the Nordic countries due to the recent NATO memberships of Sweden, that was non-aligned for 200 years, and Finland. Finland has a 1,300 kilometer border to Russia, 830 miles about, which means that the NATO border to Russia has doubled. Finland could thus have nuclear weapons 965 kilometers, 600 miles from Moscow. I don't think that Mr. Putin is very happy about this. Next slide, please. On top of that, the recent DCA, Defense Cooperation Agreements between the US and the Nordic countries, will bring 48 US military bases to our region. The deliberate trigger for the NATO memberships, as well as for the DCA agreements, was the US-Ukraine proxy war. The Finns turned into NATO fanatics overnight. and that was very suitable for the US. Next, please. Finland has not outspokenly said no to nukes in the DCA agreement. The Finnish President Stubb, who was recently elected, has stated that it would be acceptable for US nuclear weapons to be transported through Finnish territory. On top of this, Finland has made a contract for 64 F-35 fighter jets that can carry nuclear weapons, and the first ones will be delivered in 2026. What comes to Sweden, Prime Minister Kristersson in June 24 indicated that he was open to hosting nuclear arms in wartime, but at a very highly authoritative forum with Nordic ministers and military high-level officers that took about 1 week ago. That took place 1 week ago. He stated, Sweden is not at war, but there is no peace either. And this opens up for all kinds of interpretations. And this statement has been repeated by all the prime ministers in the Nordic countries. In Denmark, it is said that nothing in the DCA alters the Danish policy with regard to the stockpiling and deployment of nuclear weapons on Danish territory. But they also all the time say that they follow the NATO documents, which means they are in a nuclear alliance. Next one, please. What comes to Norway? In the High North News, it was reported in May 24 that Norway will not permit the stockpiling of nuclear weapons, landmines, or cluster munitions in its territory. But the wind is changing since it was also stated that the parliament asked the government to enter into dialogue with Denmark, Finland, and Sweden to define a shared view on the storage of nuclear weapons in our areas, which opens up this kind of theater that they can hide behind each other and said that, well, since Finland is doing this and Sweden is doing this and we are not at war, but almost at war, what could the nuclear policy be? And then finally, the last slide, please. When you look at this map, this is the Baltic area. And now Finland, Sweden are excluded. Denmark is down there. But you see Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland next door to Russia. And you see all the NATO battle groups in the Baltic nations, which are called the Enhanced Forward Presence of NATO. You can see that the Estonian Prime Minister said a couple of years ago that the Baltic Sea will turn into a NATO lake, and it is now a NATO lake. And this is very unfortunate because we are very close to Russia, and I don't think this makes Putin sleep well at night. If you look at the map, you can't. Could you go back to the first slide? Take the next one.
Yeah.
Here you see St. Petersburg in the bottom of the Finnish Gulf, and then there is a small area, the Kaliningrad, which you can't see here, between Latvia and Lithuania, where Russia can come out in the Baltic Sea. But otherwise, this is a NATO lake. They will have no access at all. It can be closed down by Denmark and Sweden for Russia in an occasion of a severe conflict. So thank you. It was just to make you aware of that we might have nuclear weapons here too in some years.
Thanks very much, Ulla, and we certainly hope not. And I know we're all going to be doing everything we can to support you in making sure that doesn't happen.
Thank you.
So we've got a few minutes left. We've got a few questions in the box there. So before Pippa rounds up and summarizes our event, I'm just going to put a few questions that we have to the panel. So I'm going to read them out, and then any the panelists would like to comment on them or answer them, please do just put your electronic hands up. So first of all, we have a question about the stability and safety of the F-35 jets. There was a recent breakdown over Wales on test flights that were taking place there very recently. So is there a risk at Lakenheath, or in fact any other NATO nuclear base where the F-35s are stored? Is this another angle for our concerns, you know, if the planes are not reliable and there may be a crash? Then we also have this, I think this is for Ben, perhaps. How does France feel about AUKUS? That's the nuclear powered submarines deal between the US, UK and Australia. We have a question, which is a more campaigning based question. How do we improve our campaign influence to open people's eyes as much as possible and show them why we need to support peace and disarmament? And then finally, we've had a question which is about the don't bank on the bomb question. The bomb, but don't bank on the bomb campaign, anti-investment campaign, which I think originated in the Netherlands. So if we could have so any comments on that. And also, let's see, oh, and someone else says, how extensive are Russia's nuclear holdings in the Kaliningrad zone? So those are the questions that we have. Please do indicate anyone if you would like to speak. I see Anne Wright has put her hand up there. Anne, go ahead.
Yes, those F-35s are dangerous and they do crash. And so we all have to be very, very concerned about them. It's the biggest weapon system that's cost the most money. It's been the most controversial in the United States. And it is, it's not yet called the Widowmaker as another one of our aircraft is, but it is a dangerous thing. And it's a very good thing for us to use as part of our protest, that it is a dangerous aircraft itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Angelika?
Yes, just a moment. I would like to answer the question, how can we make a new peace movement, a European peace movement, as Guido said it, he wants to do in the Netherlands. And I think that we have different approaches and we should should try all of them. We need to be more inclusive in the peace movement, and that means that we should go to people from the climate movement or people from the human rights movement, and or people from the trade unions, which are really under pressure because of the militarization of the societies in Europe. And there is one alliance in Germany. It's called Sicherheit, Rethink Security. And I think there is a chapter in the Netherlands too, and also in Great Britain. And if we, for instance, we come to your invitation to Lakenheath, I'm sure that we will meet a lot of people and can discuss about them. And I think every step is good to do. And IPPNW is working in this alliance. We built Rethink Security. And after our latest papers on new European security, civil security in Germany, some of the trade unions stepped up to us.
Thanks very much, Angelika. Just before I go to Naomi there was a question about whether we're recording this. And yes, we are recording it. And we will be sending the link out to those people who have registered, and it will also reside on the IPB and NATO websites. So if you want to watch it back, or if you want to let anyone else know about it, that will be coming down the line. Naomi, over to you.
I just wanted to comment again on the question of the B-35, as I said while I was speaking, that in Belgium, at least, that deploying such an airplane with a pilot, should there be a reason to use a nuclear weapon on Russia, would be a suicide mission for that pilot, because they don't possess the capacity to fly all the way to Russia and then back. But I feel like this is a very bleak situation, because it's almost like the Belgian government understands that if it gets to that point where nuclear weapons have to be used, that there's very little chances of survival anyways, and that this one suicide mission will just be one in the so many deaths. So, so besides the technical issues, I just think it shows how bleak the situation is, that even governments are kind of cutting their losses almost.
Okay, any other panelists? Yeah, Patrizia?
Yes, I want to just to add that I think that is will be really interesting if especially the European country that have the problem of nuclear sharing, if it's possible to have a contact, a common work, because, for example, this experiment that we had with Yalan about the legitimacy of the nuclear weapon in our country on the base of the domestic law, but even of international law, is one experiment that is possible to do even in Germany, in Holland, in Belgium, and even we try to take contact with Turkey is extremely important. I suggest even this way, this book will be distributed in the third meeting of Treaty of for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapon in New York. I think this is extremely important to rest in touch.
Thanks very much. Guido, over to you.
Two things on regard of banking on the bomb. I'm not completely aware. I think there were two big companies, a pension fund and an insurance company, who disinvested from nuclear installations, but I'm not sure about Nationale Nederlanden. This is the insurance company, but I think I'm sure about ING. It's a big, it's a bank as well, but there was a pension fund. So I'm not completely accurate, but it was a success, at least partially. This is my first answer, which is not 100% sure, but it was a success, and it makes difference because at this very moment, the Dutch state wants to plunder, actually to loot the pension funds in order to invest in more weaponry, and they are very, very, very reluctant. So this is a struggle going on in the CEO's headquarters. So on the second point about a pan-European strategy, yes, I think it's necessary that we are going to debate a lot and to strategize on a common plan, for instance, nuclear sharing. So there is an opportunity in England, I think, in April, and of course there is one in The Hague on 21st of June when there is a counter summit, because all of the NATO, you can meet all those crooks then. So come to us.
Thanks very much, Guido. I'm just going to comment on one of those questions which hasn't been picked up. This is about Russian nuclear holdings in Kaliningrad. Ulla showed us Kaliningrad on the map there. As far as I'm aware, there are Iskander ballistic missiles in Kaliningrad. They're nuclear capable, but as far as I am aware, there are no actual nuclear weapons there. So I know there's been speculation about that from Ukraine and so on, but there is no confirmation that Russian nuclear weapons are in Kaliningrad. There's also a question, another question, are there organized popular resistance groups to NATO bases in countries like Bulgaria? maybe other panelists might be able to share any information about that, because certainly I know from CND we've long wanted to have dialogue and so on, relations with peace campaigners in eastern parts of Europe, but we haven't yet been successful with that. So if anyone has any information to share, that would be good. And then Ben, over to you.
Yes, I just would like to mention on the peace strategy, I think the linkage that we can make and that we are making already in France with the people who are dealing with climate issues, and this is very interesting to see. Even the footprint of the military activities are being taken seriously by some of those groups. That's number one. Even the whole issue of, for example, the F-35 footprint, which is much more than the F-16, is also an interesting indicator. On top of that, there are the linkage can be made with all the people who are now talking about the energy issues, especially the so-called energy transition. We are finding out more and more that, for example, the F-35 has got a half a ton of cobalt, which comes, by the way, Naomi, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which we call the Democratic Republic from Cobalt. And this also is interesting because according to some of my friends in Brussels, there is a lot of talk these days of saying, hey, what we said about the energy transition is now also a green light for all kind of companies who can now use different minerals in order to improve the military complex, which you can also find, for example, with the propulsion of nuclear submarines. Now, related to that, I would just like to answer this question, which you raised before, Kate, which is the question of AUKUS agreement. The AUKUS agreement is actually a big scandal. I'm not going to go into detail about that. Just read the book that the Australian journalist has come out with, which is called Nuked, which you should read because it's interesting to what extent the Australians themselves feel that they have been fooled by this agreement, especially concerning their own independence. But beyond that, I would like to say that it is a proliferation scandal. With the enriched uranium that is being used, with the nuclear submarines that the US is handing over to them, it is a possibility for Australia to become actually a nuclear power. This was not possible with the French. I'm not making any publicity for the French, but you know, naval group. Yeah, they have an English name now. It sounds much better when you do business in the world. Naval Group, which is a French company in Cherbourg, has this terrible advantage of having not enriched uranium for its nuclear submarines. So this was a possibility of doing something else that would have been much less dangerous. And I don't understand why this subject has not been taken up by most of us, because this deal that has been made is actually a green light for the US to give Australia the possibility of becoming a nuclear weapons power. Voila. That's it.
Thanks very much, Ben. Yeah, that's incredibly important, and that is certainly one of the issues that CND is very seized of, and we're in touch with the Australian campaigners, particularly the trade unions there that are opposing those developments.
Well,
okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of our questions and discussions. So I'll hand over to Pippa to round us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And thank you, everyone. Thank you to all our panelists, amazing panelists, and to the participants, for those 100-odd people who've joined us today. This is being recorded, and it will be available on the CND website, the IPP website, the Women Against NATO.org website, and probably a few others. So please circulate it. There is so much important information in this webinar that we need to spread around the world as much as we can. And so moving on, GWUAN, that is Global Women United for Peace Against NATO, are having another webinar in March. This will be featuring the South American countries, entitled NATO Not Wanted in South America. That will be issued, and the details of that will be issued nearer the time. But in the meantime, please join our mailing list. Please join our newsletter list. You can unsubscribe at any time with no hard feelings, but you know, we need to spread the word about the growth and the belligerent behavior of NATO as it tries to spread its evil tentacles around the world. Really, just the last few words. We will, most of us, be in The Hague from the 20th to the 23rd of June, where NATO is having one of its summits. We'll be having a counter summit, of course. We'll be joining up with lots of other organizations, hopefully the No to NATO groups, the Resist NATO groups, the local peace and justice groups, and many from around Europe. So please come to The Hague. The Women Against NATO are also hoping to have an action at the ICJ in support of their beleaguered position holding up international law, which is something which seems to be more and more trodden into the dust. And also I want to mention again, Lakenheath, the peace camp at Lakenheath. Please, everybody, get involved, come along. They will look after you, they will feed you, they will find somewhere for you to stay. So please go to Lakenheath. And that's it really. Just finally to say we've had a huge amount of support for this webinar from lots of organizations. I'll read them out to you as I close. So obviously the hosts were CND. The organizer was GWUAN, Global Women United Against NATO. Supporters have been Veterans for Peace USA, the IPB, UNAC, the United National Anti-War Coalition, the No to War, No to NATO Network, World Beyond War, Mondo Senza Guerra e Senza Violencia, the Lista Civica Italiana. Other Italian organizations who have heavily supported us are WILPF in Italia, Presenza, the Observatory Against the Militarization of Schools, World Without Wars and Without Violence, Energy for Human Rights, APS, and Stefano Rodota, sorry, I said that wrong, Stefano Rodota, Common Goods Association. So we didn't approach many, most of those came to us. We hope to be doing more of the same. We hope it's as well supported. Thank you so much to our panelists and to everyone who took part by joining us today. Take care. Peace. Stay strong.
Thanks. Thank you.